Professor Natasha. So, dear colleagues, good day. Now, I'm Radmila Janicic, professor at Faculty of Organizational Sciences, University of Belgrade. Now, with honor, we will start our session, Cultural Democracy, Different Perspectives in Cultivating Tolerance and Appreciating Diversity. Our first speaker is Professor Jasmine Lindemann. Professor Jasmine is with us. Yes, Professor Jasmine is with us. Her paper is named Managing the Arts of Independence, Investigating the Importance of Purpose of Arts Management within Arts Activism. Professor Jasmine Lindemann has recently completed her Master of Arts, Festival and Cultural Management from Queen Margaret University. She is originally from Australia and moved to Scotland 7 years ago to pursue a professional career in the arts sector. Her research interests include political arts, Scottish independence, and artist community networks. Please, Professor Jasmine, present to us your very, very interesting topics and paper. Here you are.
Thank you so much. I should start with saying that I'm not a professor. Wish I was one day, maybe. But thank you for the intro. Yes. No, it's fine. I just don't want to be taking titles from people who've earned them. I will start, I think, by sharing my screen, if that is okay, and then we'll get into it. But thank you so much for having me to start with. I really appreciate it. So let's have a look. Where are we? Okay. It's actually very exciting. There's like all these extra options, and I'm like, what is all these? Hang on. I'll just share. Okay, let me know that you've got that. Yeah, perfect. This is me. Hang on, we'll just get in there and go from here. Perfect. So as you mentioned, I'm from Australia, and so my kind of experience coming to Scotland and kind of taking on this research comes from a very different, I guess, perspective. I grew up very politically engaged in Australia and very privileged in that way that my family were just already quite politically engaged. You know, I was handing out how to vote cards for the Greens at age 5. I was going into the polling station with my grandmother very young, knowing my like citizens' responsibility of voting and why that's so important and kind of my place in that. So I think a lot of my interest in the political side of things came from that really intense kind of responsibility of someone kind of as an individual and as a citizen, as someone in the world of politics affecting everybody. But my passion's always been the arts. So a big part of this research is bringing those two things together. And I guess looking into seeing how I could help. So when you kind of have this bigger issues, and I moved to this country and to Scotland and realized the big inequalities that face the Scottish people, and the independence movement is the big front of that. So obviously this is an international conference, so a little bit of context, but Scotland is part of the United Kingdom since 1707. And there's lots of movement and lots of conversation about changing that and becoming an independent sovereign country again. So in 2014, they had a big referendum nearly 10 years ago, and it was pretty close. But a lot of things have changed the political landscape. But I think coming in to this country with kind of a fresh perspective, I was, I think, quite emotionally connected with the outrage of it, the outrage of country not having its own rights, its own kind of choices. And I think that kind of set a fire behind me of what I wanted to what I wanted to try and do. So obviously I did the normal things, the not arts research things first. I joined the SNP, which is the Scottish National Party, a member with them. I did canvassing. I did lots of other kind of ways to, I think, help the movement. However, when I was given this opportunity to study my master's, and I think not straight away, but very early on in my process of doing this master's, knowing I had this big research project to do, I knew it had to do with Scottish independence. I knew it had to do with the relationship between artists and using, I guess, like connecting with these incredible people who have used their passion and their form of expression around arts activism, and specifically around internet and independence for Scotland. So I think it was something that has always been quite important to me in the last 7 years at least. But I do think that that's kind of where I positioned myself, in knowing that I needed to do something, but kind of being aware that this might be a nice opportunity to kind of start the conversation with my research. It's become much bigger than I ever imagined, so we'll get there as well, which is quite exciting as well. So we'll keep going through here. So a big part of this started when I was just looking around random things like, oh, what have artists done already? You know, what have we found? And I fell onto this book by accident, which I'm very grateful for, because it really, as a new Scot, as someone coming into this conversation late, I didn't have the full context of maybe growing up in Scotland. So this book, and Alexander Moffat and Alan Rick, The Arts of Independence, obviously is where I got the title for my event as well. So I'll talk a bit about that in a bit, but it really gave me a bigger picture of how artists have been in relationship with this conversation. It didn't start, obviously, at the beginning. Art in Scotland is very historic and has quite a rich history, but it did start, and this book starts kind of at the 79 referendum. Now, the 1979 referendum in Scotland was to become a devolved nation, which was then successful in 99. So it means there's some local governing, but still not full sovereignty. So it kind of looked at, and that referendum failed. So that referendum in 79 failed. And these authors found this really interesting work of different artists through then, especially a musician, and they've got some really beautiful lines of his work that was just kind of showing, I guess, the pain of the nation, but through, again, his art form. So through his form of expression, to show that kind of that step backwards and not being able to kind of progress as a nation, already having this artistic expression. So that already I was straight in. I was like, wow, I had no idea about the 79 referendum. It kind of really gave me lots of context. And then it led me to the National Collective. So the National Collective in 2014, with the referendum then, they actually started in 2011 in preparation. They were an incredible art network. So an artist network, it was fully grassroots network of over 4,000 people across Scotland, mostly young people. They did a really great job of kind of really engaging quite a lot of young people to be involved. That vote in 2014, 16-year-olds were allowed to contribute. So it also was engaging a lot of young voters as well. But it was a big part of getting that connection with a society. And I think looking at changing that political conversation, just taking it in a different direction, or broadening who can have that conversation or how to have that conversation. And I think the interesting part about that, a lot of it was participatory arts. So a lot of it was craft. A lot of it was not, I think, what we would describe as high-end art. So it meant that it was also accessible to lots of different people. And it meant that people who maybe weren't in that conversation politically, due to many reasons, due to like socioeconomic reasons or education reasons, they weren't generally part of this bigger political conversation. The National Collective had an avenue to kind of create an artistic pathway to be able to speak to different people. So I think that for me, reading all about that, learning all about that as a movement was incredibly inspirational. So that was kind of a bit of context. I know this is, again, an international space, so hopefully that's helpful. So that kind of leads me to some Scottish nationalism. So these are some of my themes that I wanted to kind of talk about today. So I think approaching this research, I wanted to look at certain themes and question certain themes. So for me as an Australian nationalism comes with a lot of negative connotations. Australian nationalism comes with racism and othering and is fundamentally aggressive. And learning about Scottish nationalism and about creating a nation through that, I was very aware of doing this research. I had to be aware of this theme. I had to be aware that it can't all be big flags and big banners, and but also looking at if there is a power. I think it made me question on quite a lot of things, like if there's a power to nationalism, if it can be used for good, and hopefully I think that it can, is a big part of what I've kind of come to. This quote is from Terry Pratchett, who is a British author, and he created these characters called the Knack Feagles, as you see here, which are kind of this quintessential stereotypical Scot, based on the picked people. And I opened my event, which I realize I haven't actually said about anything yet, but I will. I opened my event with this quote because it felt like it embodied what we were trying to achieve, or what Scotland as the independence movement is trying to achieve, but in kind of a positive nationalism aspect to that. The event was a showcase, which we'll get to in a second. But again, I kind of introed it with this to kind of hopefully give some perspective. It's also something because I'm quite passionate about, but I also think that rather than like the Braveheart image of freedom for Scotland, there's kind of a different image we can kind of stand behind as well. So, and also a literary image, a literary aspect. So again, focusing on the theme of nationalism, I was drawn again to questioning if it was something that was okay, if I was promoting something that didn't include people or was separating, Scot-born people. And as someone who is a new Scot, it's not something that I have the right to do anyway, but in the sense that Scotland, and from the SNP, so from the government downwards, from the Scottish local governments, they have tried to really reiterate that the Scotland we want to create is a Scotland for everyone. It's a Scotland for people who are here. It's not about the color of your skin, your accent, where you're from. It's about where you choose to be, and making a country better and fairer for yourselves and for others. So I think they are trying to do their best in that way, but again, being aware that that flag can still be used in aggression. So that was just a thing I wanted to kind of bring up, especially in this kind of cultural democracy conversation, that nationalism, I think, is always going to be a part of that conversation. So I'll talk a bit about my event. So the event that I ran, so it was practice-based research that was all this about. I'm covered in paper, but it was very practical. So I ran this incredible showcase with beautiful artists that I'll tell you about in a moment. And this was a big shout out to kind of call out to artists to get the right kind of people in the room. And again, looking at the right kind of people, there was no wrong kind of people, to be fair, but it was just making sure that I think that people were coming from the same place or had the same core intention. So a lot of it was putting these on different Facebook groups and like political groups, sharing with my own artist network that I have in Scotland, which I'm really grateful for, and aspects of that. So I found some incredible artists who you'll see here. A brilliant poet in Myra Ross. I'll end this presentation with a poem of hers. And Action Theatre Scotland, who are these young guys who wrote this incredible play called Alba, all about being asked as a 16-year-old boy how to vote for your country. So I thought that was really interesting and really fascinating. Kathy McSparren is an author who wrote a book called The Cold Town, which has a futuristic look at the world, and there's two versions. One's quite dystopian and one's utopian. And the utopian version was in an independent Scotland, and it was kind of looking at the subtle ways or different ways where this story, this kind of using art in this way, comes in subtle and more extreme ways. So Action Theatre Scotland, it was very upfront, exactly what they were talking about, whereas Kathy's book was more subtle, but it's really, really important to what it was representing and what it was, I guess, looking to create a future that if we can't make unless we understand it. And that, I guess, is another purpose of art in that way. Hannah Morton wrote an incredible play called Sad Girls Club. And we had just an excerpt of her play, which was basically her making fun of Boris Johnson and everyone in Westminster. And it was beautiful satire and kind of got everyone emotionally in the room, quite together and angry, but in a really helpful, powerful way. It was beautiful to have her and her team there that day as well. Richard Prow, photographer who started taking photos in 2018. He started taking photos of independence rallies, Scottish independence rallies. He was inspired by the bravery of people who were kind of out there and rallying, and the fact that modern media wasn't speaking about them, wasn't covering these stories. He found quite outrageous that people would say, oh, there's only, 3 people out there today, but he would be there so he could actually have that recognition and share with people who are marching, but also to kind of reassure them, but also give them their recognition. I think the best, incredible part of Richard Prow is he'd never shown his work in public before. He'd only ever done it online. So this gave him a really lovely opportunity to be able to share it with an audience and share it with his audience as well, which was really lovely. Lynn and Neil from the Yes Stones and Slates movement. They're incredible community artists. So they paint, and there's a next picture you'll see here. Here we go. They paint on stones and different slates and aspects of that as well, but they kind of place them around the place. There are some all around the world, and it's basically to create a non-confrontational way to speak of independence, because it starts, with a colourful stone. It starts with something that a kid can pick up and ask a question. And so it means that it doesn't have to be big and scary and behind closed doors, this political kind of engagement. It can be a beautiful rock that we can have a conversation about. I was very excited to have them involved, as they're the only people I knew before this project that I was aware of in the kind of independence arts scene. So I was very excited to have them there. You see Richard's pictures on the right there as well, which is lovely to have him there. This is the Yes Stones slates. So this says, yes, 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 independence for Scotland. So again, there was made in a very community aspect. So you can see the amount of people who were involved in actually creating this, and then to bring it to be able to present it to an audience was really lovely. Speaking of activism, again, getting early into that, and I'm aware of time, but this is a bit of feedback we received, which I received, which I thought was really interesting. Which was looking at this kind of force and energy that we have to make cultural change, and where does that force or creativity go when that change happens. So this bit of feedback just really got me thinking in lots of different ways, but it also made me think, hopefully we get to that stage. Firstly, I'm hoping that we get to a point where we get to question, what are we going to do with all this creativity energy that we had around this change? But I think the reality is we already use it. I mean, there's so much arts activism around climate change, around gender rights, and lots of other kind of, I guess, political discourse. There's already so many artists around lots of different things. So I don't think that after independence, this art goes into a void. I think it just gets repositioned to where it needs to go. But it was just an interesting kind of look there. Okay. This was such a rattle through. It was the first time I've done a conference, so I'm really, really grateful for this. I've just finished this process and this work. So I think I'm just to time, but I will read this piece. So Myra Ross, our poet, who's an incredible artist, she traveled 4 hours to be to the showcase. And so on the train back, she wrote this piece and sent it to me. And I was profoundly honored to be also part of an event that also inspired art, which wasn't the purpose. It wasn't what I planned. A really lovely aspect to come from it. But I thought I'd close this and open for questions, but I'll just read this through to everybody as well. Art is independence. It's definitely choice. A freedom of expression. Art is the artist's voice. Some art expressed in silence, a voice we don't hear. Yet still within the stillness, the artist's choice is clear. Some art, it'll be written down. Consumption brings the voice. To watch, to see, interpret. Ignore the artist's choice. Yes, I see connection, the threads that run right through. Independence given voice is what the artists choose to do. Okay, any questions and thoughts? That was so fast. I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you so much for this very important and interesting topic. Thank you. And brilliant presentation. At the end of our session, we will have time for discussion and questions. Okay.
Perfect. I will just stop
now
sharing there.
we go to our next speakers. They are Professor Tamara Jovovic and Professor Olena Lilova with a paper named 21st Century Shakespeare in Cross-Cultural Spaces. I will read about our professors. Professor Tamara Jovovic is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Foreign Languages, University Mediterranean, Podgorica, Montenegro. She teaches American literature, African American women's literature, and English language. She earned a PhD from the University of Belgrade in 2016. Her research interests include literary theory, feminist politics, translation, and teaching. Our Professor Olena Lilova, PhD, is an associate professor at the Faculty of Foreign Languages at the University Mediterranean, Podgorica, Montenegro. Her research interests include medieval and early modern drama. She completed a doctoral thesis devoted to the poetics of George Gascoigne's in 2003. She is a member of the Montenegrin Association of the European Society for the Study of English. Welcome, Professor Tamara Jovovic and Professor Olena Lilova. Please present us your paper.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Sorry, we just need to work with the microphone, please. Very much. It's a great pleasure to participate in the conference and to share our ideas about art, literature in particular, and how we can use it in cross-cultural spaces. My computer scrolls. Real nowadays that the methods of literary analysis make a part of a complex multidisciplinary approach to phenomena understudy. Elements of interpretation of fiction are incorporated into classes and seminars in language, sociology, psychology, political studies, cultural studies, and other disciplines. Also, examples from fiction can be used for organizing effective communities in class, establishing ground for discussions that arouse mutual interest, thus serving communicative and teaching purposes. Literary texts stimulate evocative responses to problems that are represented in them, make our students aware of their empathy for others, teach them to express their empathy, which develops their intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, and may help them become more successful professionals in their future careers. Recognizing the fact that people are different, that they have different values shaped by different backgrounds, is the essence of the concept of cultural awareness that is so widely used nowadays in the educational discourse, and that is really important in cross-cultural spaces. Under cultural awareness, we understand sensitivity to similarities and differences that exist between cultures, communities. Cultural awareness is inseparable from cultural identification of self and other as representative of a certain community. Both cultural self-identity and cultural awareness are manifested in the system of individuals' social interactions. Both contribute greatly to the maintenance of the social order and help adequate functioning of the society. Cultural awareness has become an obligatory requirement of successful educational process, especially in contemporary classrooms where learner population is so diverse. So there is the need to get adapted, for teachers to get adapted to the changing classroom environments and to look for new ways of creating a common base of interaction and resources for students. We suggest that literature or a text of fiction can be such a common base of interaction and resources.
Okay, so my colleague previously mentioned that learning comes from or emerges from social, cultural, and political spaces in which it takes place, and through these, through this interaction and relationships that occur between teachers and students, or just among students. So why do we need literature text in class, and what are some advantages of using literary text in class? First of all, a literary text may allow learners to see some new concepts or concepts in a new or original way. That is the first advantage. And while informational text just gives us a clear and direct description of some specific features of the object. So unlike informational, literary texts are, they depict reality as fluid and dynamic, and they inspire exploration of some questionable issues that an author deals with in his work. So literary texts are representational rather than referential, and they also involve the working of imagination. So that's what we try to do with our students, to sort of evoke bright emotions and invite students to respond to the material and themes and topics under discussion. That's one thing. That's another thing. So how do we use literature to raise cultural awareness? Well, first of all, in a non-literature class, we normally use practical criticism and not stylistic analysis. However, practical criticism is something that is rather an intuitive approach to text, and it can be undertaken at any type of class. It is method of reading fiction that does not imply systematic reasoning on a text on all levels of its structure. So we need students' original evocative responses, which sort of enhance their empathy for others and make them more emotionally intelligent. So I just mentioned some of the features of practical criticism, and I won't repeat it. So from our teaching experience, we know that students who learn to produce their own subjective reaction to a text instead of repeating what teacher said or what is written in some theoretical and critical materials, these students are more likely to develop well-rounded personalities and high emotional intelligence.
Why Shakespeare's drama? Why Renaissance art, Renaissance tragedies, comedies? We know that the problem of self-identity, of cultural and national consciousness were really topical in early modern Europe, or in Renaissance Europe. It was the time of creating nations, what as the previous speaker just mentioned, or the time when the sense of self as a part of some national community was being developed. In Europe, modern political nations were being formed in the epoch of Renaissance. And Shakespeare chose to talk about his plays, the plays of the most prominent English playwright of Renaissance. We believe that this is a very rich material we can use to foster cultural awareness in our students, with our students. And we do believe that Shakespeare, well, it's the general truth, was the great humanist, meaning that his basic intentions were to defend good, to punish evil, to help people to find ways to reconcile, to coexist peacefully, and so on. Cultural awareness can be developed, fostered through a number of Shakespeare's plays. In our presentation, we will give you some illustrations or examples from The Merchant of Venice and from the play of Othello. In such a way, we'll try to demonstrate that Shakespeare is relevant and should be relevant in young people's life, that for them the possibility for referencing Shakespeare is very important. It connects them with their cultural heritage of the European civilization, and in such a way they gain some cultural credibility when they refer to Shakespeare's texts. So then I would also like to mention just the fact that besides the national identity that was important in European Renaissance culture, another very important element of self-identification was religious one, a very important aspect or element of self-identification. The event which stood behind and before all formations of spiritual and national identity was the Reformation. Findlay, the contemporary researcher, calls this crucial transformation of the church that occurred under the reign of King Henry VIII an ever-resonant cultural trauma and had huge impact in all spheres of life in post-Reformation England. One of the reasons why the issue of self-identity became so important in early modern England was the necessity to manage the issues of ownership. Early modern time is known to be a transient period from the feudal to the capitalist economy, in which mutual recognition of oneself by the recognition of self by others and vice versa was the key for the completion of social and monetary interaction. If one's identity was not recognized by the social collective, not only their sense of self was threatened, but also their property. So that is one of the reasons why self-identification is so important. In The Merchant of Venice, Shakespeare considers or portrays the character of the Jewish usurer, Shylock, who lives in Venice and earns his living by lending money upon advantage. Out of their mutual repulsiveness with the merchant Antonio, he gives a loan to Antonio under the condition that if Antonio fails to return the money on time, he will have to give a pound of his flesh to Shylock. So we see two contrasting attitudes towards usury in the play. Usury as business, as activity, Venetians versus Shylock. While Shylock complains of Christians being indecent, cruel, unfair to him and to his business, Antonio and his friends, Venetians, emphasize the greed and cruelty of Jews in pursuing their materialistic interests, too rational, practical, and down to earth. You see a quotation here in this slide. He hates our sacred nation. He rails even there where merchants most do congregate on me, my bargains, and my well-won thrift, which he calls interest. Cursed be my tribe if I forgive him, says Shylock. In general, Shylock's and Antonio's speeches, monologues, remarks are very emotional. We can say over excited, with lots of generalizations, with lots of cursing, with lots of cliches, often unfair cliches about their opponents. The Jew says a lot of offending, insulting things about Christians and vice versa. On the other hand, we can say that these speech characterizations, you see another example on the next slide. These speech characterizations add a lot to our perception of the characters. Let's say Antonio is not perceived as so definitely good after all those accusations that he pronounces, that he says about Shylock. Despite all his noble deeds and intentions to help his friend, he does not appear such a good person. On the other hand, Shylock, all Shylock's worries and his distress, including the verdict of the court that he should be dispossessed of his property and converted into Christianity, make theater audience as well as readers sympathize with him. Dispossessed, betrayed by his closest person, his daughter Jessica, he is required to refuse his identity, his religion.
Okay, so in another Shakespeare's play, Othello, we have another example of cultural racism. And cultural racism is believed that the cultural ways of one group or one nation are superior to the cultural ways of another. So it can be found both in individuals and institutions. So each level of racism supports and reinforces the others, and together they contribute to its general resistance to change. So we can see in a very opening scene of Othello that Othello is the main protagonist. He's alien to the white Christian Europe, what we would now call an immigrant. And his visible racial difference seems to be defining aspect of his identity. And it is also a source of his charismatic power and something that generates horror in white Europeans. So the play begins with this very graphic, violent image of sexual and racial difference. Even now, quote, even now, very now, an old black ram is stopping your white youth. So we can see other examples of racial slurs. He's been called also thick lips, Barbary horse, and so on. So this shows that Venetians were fearful of Moors entering their white community, and his father-in-law, Desdemona's father, he feels betrayed by their marriage, and he wants justice to be served. And also, he's in a position of racial superiority to Othello and also gender superiority to Desdemona. So he needs to be reassured in his dominance. And here we can see some other examples of racism. He's called stranger. So these are just some examples from Shakespeare's plays that can help us try to talk about cultural awareness, cultural competence, and also cultural racism. And some of the topics or questions that we like to ask our students are, for example, is it easy or difficult to be a representative of a different culture in a homogeneous multicultural society? Or how can one cope with stereotypical negative image of one's nation? Or what role does cultural racism play in today's society? So these are some topics, these are some questions to open the topic of cultural awareness. And also, why do we think that it is necessary to become culturally competent? Well, because cultural competence, it is an imperative in today's society, not just in the classroom. And in the near future, it can become a requirement for all jobs, not just in the teaching profession. So, for example, 25 years ago, computer skills were an isolated novelty, and today it is, of course, difficult to successfully compete in any job market without them. So the same may eventually be true of cultural competence.
Just to conclude, we hope we will agree that Shakespeare's texts can be used for developing cultural competence, and the playwright's shrewd observations about human nature, about norms and principles of functioning of the human society, make his drama unrivaled throughout centuries. Shakespeare was the great humanist, that is, he believed he could enhance, right, educate, develop good in people, and to live in a peaceful society, to be tolerant to each other. We are to be aware of differences between us as individuals and between cultures and national communities we belong to.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Olena Lilova and Professor Tamara Jovovic, for a brilliant and very important topic and presentation. Thank you very much. At the end of session, we will have questions and discussion. Thank you. Now we have our next speaker, Michele Fiorillo from Scuola Normale Superiore, Italy, with a very interesting topic, Theaters of Democracy. Please, colleague Michele,
yes.
share your presentation.
Thanks a lot, Professor Janicic.
Yes.
Thanks to all the team of the Mediterranean University and the embassy in Podgorica, and especially to Professor Natasha Kraljevic to have circulated to me this very interesting idea of conference that now is in the making. I have to, first of all, to be sorry because I'm traveling, and apparently since yesterday something it happened to my video camera. Probably it was damaged. I tried this morning with a computer repairing on the way, but so they say that I should have leave to them the laptop. It was not possible. So I'm very sorry for that. I hope you can hear me, and I will, by the way, try to share some picture with you. Something I will touch in the second part of my
Okay, during you prepare your picture and your presentation and speak, I will say that our guest from Italy, Michele Fiorillo, Master of Art, is a political philosopher. He studied at the Scuola Normale Superiore and at the College of Europe. His research focuses on history of ideas, theories of democracy, and European integration. He is a co-initiator of Civilo Europe, an organization for transnational deliberative democracy and of Citizens Take Over Europe, a European coalition of over 50 NGOs. He currently coordinates European Citizens Assembly project and is also research fellow of the Center for United Nations Consultational Research. He founded and edited the magazines of culture and politics, Il Contesto and Il Pensiero Democratico, and collaborates with Micro Lega. In his spare time, it is very interesting that you write about spare time. He also devotes himself to theater, being the co-author of the project Consultational Circus from 2020, and having directed, among others, the place Antigona in Parliament. It is interesting. Michele, we will come to the next play of Antigona in Parliament, and also the elected representative of Law and Justice, and others players. Thank you very much, Michele.
Thanks very much to you all. Thanks very much to you all to having here. What is or what could be the role of the arts in shaping culture and triggering social change? No, this is the core question of our international symposium. What I will try to contribute to it is a reflection on the intertwining of the birth of theater and the development of democracy and their fruitful connection also for the future of Europe. It's like my duck alarm, so I will try to stay in 15 minutes. So we can dare to call theater as the essential art form for democracy, and we know this at least because they were born in the same city, the same polis. This is surely a well-known fact here. In the late 16th century before Christ, the idea of Western, we always have to underline Western democracy, because at least since Amartya Sen went out with this little book on some roots of democracy also in India. We also in the ancient India, we have always to specify Western democracy was born. That was especially thanks to the Clisthenes reform of Athenian institution on 508 before Christ. It was, of course, a very partial democracy, but the idea that power should stem from the consent of the government and the power should flow from below to above, from bottom to the top, and not the other way around, we can say that was, as a general idea, born also in ancient Athens. We know also that around that time, better to say a little bit before, somebody, the legend say the name of Thespis, invented the idea of a performance dialogue, and that was performance dialogue that then led to the tragedy, with the chorus, etc. That was, as we know, the end of an older development, the earliest origins of the drama were to be found in ancient hymns, the dithyrambs, sung in honor of Dionysus. The hymns then later adapted for choral procession, in which participants would dress with mask and costume. And at some point, we know certain members of the chorus will take special roles opposing the chorus in the procession, but still, I mean, was not precisely at the theater as then we know, but that come with the development. Actually, it's interesting also, one of the main push was given from what now we call a tyrant, Pisistratus, no? That established a series of public festival, included the Dionysia, City Dionysius Festival, the Festival of Dionysus, in honor of Dionysus, that of course was also the protagonist of the dithyrambs. And here also an important role had the competition, the agon between different authors, competition in music, in singing, in dance, and poetry. And one of these authors competing for poetry was this Thespis, no? That is the legendary first author of tragedy, also the legendary first actor, because the legend is that around, legend or like sort of history is that around the 535 before Christ, he astonished the audience by leaping on the back of his wooden cart, reciting the poetry as he was not just declaiming, but as he was actually the characters, the lines he was reading. And he has done this basically performing a dialogue. But what does it mean to invent performance dialogue, and what actually is this is in connection, was and is in connection with democracy? Let's give a concrete example for one of the most famous tragedy of all times. In Sophocles' play Antigone, King Creon, after ordering the execution of his niece for betraying him, asked, "Am I to rule for others or myself?" Aemon, Creon's son and Antigone's lover, in his shock replies, "A state for one man is no state at all." We know there are different interpretations of Antigone, but I mean, I trust the scholar they are seeing in the dialectic between Creon and Antigone, a dialectic not between, generally speaking, state, the love of the state, and a rebel, but between an autocratic state and a rebel to the autocratic state. And this is actually, there are philologues, they are like giving proof for that. Now we have not the time, but that in a way give us also like really the legitimacy to see this dialogue as a sort of a prototype of the core of democracy, like performing in a theater dialogue. This simple exchanges was, you know, the date of the tragedy is 441 before Christ, or at least this is in the tradition, and demonstrate how one character that time was performing a challenge to the autocracy of another. And this kind of tune, actually, we find in a way or another also in other tragedies of Sophocles and the ones of Aeschylus and surely Euripides. In Aeschylus, okay, we could name, of course, Oresteia with the transformation of the Erinnes in the Eumenides, the birth of democracy with the tribunal of the Areopagus, no, like overcoming the model of vindication in the relation between humans. So, like, of course, what is also maybe astonishing us is also the fact if that was so important also in the development of political action, political thinking, is astonishing us that only we have so few tragedies or plays. This like we know around 30, a bit more than 30 for the tragedies, and actually someone could say actually also that one of the reasons could be also because. But this is like not philological actually, and this is so I dare to say that, but don't think this is too much academically, but it's interesting. On the 32, it's interesting also at some point democracy turn again into authoritarian system also in Athens. Now we know Polybius' cycle of institutional enforcement, and to have a democracy similar to the ones of Athens, we had to wait a long time, maybe the communes in Italy, the system of the communes, and other few examples. But well, like what is shown is the idea of democracy in Athens was nurtured in the outdoor amphitheaters that dot the hillside through the many city-states, actually not only Athens of ancient Greece, but also, we have to underline that whereas Athenian democracy added, as they did the competition of the tragic, or at least at this level of the most famous three tragic or famous comic writers like Aristophanes, their seeds were planted, and their model was, by the way, imitated by other authors through the centuries. As the critics say, not at the same level, except maybe from Seneca and few others, but that was the model, and that was, even if the democratic institutions were not there. That maybe because even if there was no more democracy, the idea that the theater was a fundamental shaper of the mind and soul of citizen as a sort of collective paideia, that was an essential precondition needed to enable citizens to be active players in the community, even if that the community then expressed the institutions that were no more democratic in the sense now we use or was used at the time of classic democracy in Athens. So this idea of theater and paideia was in a way also maintained also when democracy was no more there. But returning to like the classic Athens, the classic democracy time, we know that the festival of Dionysus gathered the entire citizen of Athens, a citizen actually intended at large. So in this case, as inhabitants, so like it is likely also here there is debate among scholars, but it likes that it is I'm sure that the attending the theater was possible both for men and women, and also from visitors. Sometimes also the slaves were enabled to see the spectacles. What we also know, and that was a big discrimination, corresponded, and this is also interesting, also to the enactment of democracy in Athens. We know the women were not allowed to take roles, even not to participate to the assemblies of political debates and to assume political roles. And at the same time, they were not allowed to have a role as actors in the tragedies, despite the fact that many of the protagonists of the tragedies were women, as we quoted some minutes before the Antigone famous play. But what now is interesting for our discourse is that the festival of Dionysus was taking in Athens place in one sacred side of the Acropolis, and in this very same place, at some point of the political development of Athens, around the 300 before Christ, so actually towards the end of the classic Athenian democracy, the theater of Dionysus was the place where the general assembly of the people, so the so-called ecclesia, from which we know also comes the terms chiesa, ecclesia, meaning church, but this is another story. So like the adunance of all the people of a community, we have always to repeat, all the people in that case, unfortunately, not the woman, not the servants or the slaves. They were debating the general public affair, and they were proceeding then to the election through sortition. Is another important element to remember, of the council that will then deliberate on the common good of the city. Actually, not only before Christmas, but there were also 2 annual meetings of the Ecclesia taking place in Theatre of Dionysus, apparently also at the time of Pericles. But generally speaking, the assembly at the time of until Pericles were taking place on the Pnyx, this hill in front of the Acropolis. And that was also maybe interesting. And when they were speaking from the tribune of the Pnyx, the orators, they were looking basically to the temple of Athena. So they were looking to the reason. They should, like also symbolically, they were remembered they should speak by reason, not by passion in a way. Or by passionate reason, we could say, probably. So, like, the numbers of the audience was around, of the audiences of the assembly, audience or protagonists were both, maybe mostly audience, unfortunately, because also there were dynamics, as we know, of populism also in Athens. So few orators taking the floor and like ruling at the end, especially the strategoi, they were elected and not taken by sortition, as Pericles said. Were, by the way, around 6,000 citizens. At least this is the number of classical Athens 5th century. And also what is interesting, there is a debate among scholars. Most of the scholars say the theaters were primarily built for performance, theatrical performances, and then used also sometime for ecclesia, for the adunance of the people. But actually, in some cases, it happened also the other way around. Apparently, for instance, in Metapontum, first was a big ecclesia, and then that was transformed in theater. Whatever. That's by what is interesting for us is this connection. Also, a connection intertwined that also marks a physical distance in a way. Then if you think to the Acropolis of Athens, you have the Acropolis. The Acropolis, actually, the actual Aker point, where there is the sacred point, where there is the temple of Athena in the top. You would have the assembly on the Pnyx, on another part of the hill, not the same hill of Acropolis, but nearby. And on the other side of the Acropolis, you would have, this is the duck. You will, duck at the end of 50 minutes, or maybe have other 5 minutes, so I could at least come to our days showing you a few photos, and then we have also the debate. And also then you have the Theatre of Dionysus in a sacred side of the Acropolis, down to the top of the Acropolis where there is the theatre. So you have the god in a way inspiring, Athena god inspiring in a way, both the ecclesia and the theatre, also if there the god is Dionysus. Okay. Then also, if you want, you can talk about a triangle where there is reason, the political deliberation, and theatrical passionate dialogue in a way, no? And the three things are connected through probably this common element of Athena, which is the symbolization of the reason. Well, now I want to show you something. What happened? So that was actually something I have there to propose in the European Parliament when I was Schumann trainee there. And now I'll share screen. How you do this? So I will show. Condividi schermo. Desktop 1. I don't know. I will try. Just a moment. So basically, in the meanwhile, Zoom, okay. Okay, no, sorry, that is my mistake. I can maybe share a file, no? Maybe let me share a file. Let's file, okay. Wait me just a moment, because if not, I will talk. Give me 1 minute. Okay, this one. Let's hope it's not too heavy to share. Okay, during its charging, it's because there are photos. I don't know, it's really too much. Sorry for this technical. So basically, what we made as trainees was a group of around 30 people. We performed Antigone, actually, in the second main auditorium of the European Parliament. Actually, we asked for the plenary in Brussels, the plenary room, but they say, no, come on, it's too much. It's there. You will not have a, but we can give you like the biggest. That is actually the room where the biggest group. On a personal level, I say, unfortunately, EPP group. It's a meeting in the European Parliament, so it was a room of around 200, containing 200 people. And I have to say that at least when we performed, 2/3 of the room was full of other EP trainees or invited people from Brussels and around that were able to enter the European Parliament to see this performance on this stage on a room of the European Parliament that is basically, you know, the model of the plenaries, like on the Parliament, is the form of the classical theater. So in this way, we managed to turn the stage of political stage of the European Parliament in a theater, as the theater of Dionysus was often turned in the past into, it was a theater stage, turned into a political stage. So here, finally, very heavy, you can open if you want. You have this little booklet, so you see the affiche of Antigone in Parliament, a elected representation on law and justice. And they were except from Antigone, Bacchae, Eumenides, Assemblywoman. So precisely, you know, was in the ancient times, in the Dionysus Festival, there were 3 tragedies plus a comedy, more or less, the trilogy plus also the, not a comedy, the satiresque drama, actually, at the start, had to be around the same topic. And here the topic was this reflection on law and justice, the relation between law and justice, the classical topic of Antigone. You see in the booklet like the different excerpt from the tragedies we choose with some chained logic, but now I have not the time to explain you, but you can get. And yeah, you can see also some photos, so also how it was performed. There is not a proper stage for performing in the European Parliament type of auditoriums. The plenary room it's more or less the same but bigger, but we managed to have the chorus right down to the like the tribune of the speakers. So in that way, actually, we try to mix, no, the 2 things. And at some point, when there was the turn of Athena to institute the Areopagus tribunal, we use the tribunal speakers, so to symbolize this actual institution of a democratic institution on the premise of a theater, but in this case was really an institution. Yes, and so yeah, you can get some taste of the play from these photos. I had also a video, but that will be probably take too much time to share with you. I want just maybe for the debate, I will telecharge another thing, and I finish because I see Natasha writing me that the time is ended. I will telecharge because there was the colleague talking about Shakespeare use. And actually, before this performance, I managed to involve the College of Europe colleagues, alumni, in doing a performance from Shakespeare, also from Merchant of Venice, on the premise of the College of Europe campus in the Natolin Park in Warsaw. And also, and here handed what was particular here was, of course, also to have actors from all over Europe. Was a community, it was community theater. And actually, we also, this process in the European Parliament, we're also starting a discussion how the European Parliament could also open a space for type of deliberative democracy model of assembly, like the citizen assembly in Ireland. So we were like also promoting this idea in the parliament around, and actually maybe you have followed this in the Conference on the Future of Europe. The European Parliament hosted citizen assembly some years after. I don't know if it was our ideas that was around there, but in a way that is very like symbolic, at least very, very strong, because that maybe I leave this for the debate. Maybe the renovation of democracy through citizen assembly could go hand in hand with a renovation of the theater as public space of debate and reflection enacted in performance. Okay, I will now try to upload the other booklet with the photos of the other performance, and I stop here. And yeah, sorry to have been a bit long. Yes, so I finished, and now I will upload the photo, but you can continue with the, I don't know if there is the debate or for some, maybe another speaker, right? So.
Thank you, Michele Fiorillo, for a brilliant and beautiful presentation and speak. This was really enjoy to listen. Beautiful story about democracy, about ancient theater, and also we will have time at the end about discussion. But I have to say, beautiful sentence by Antigona. I'm born for love, not for hate. Beautiful sentence in ancient tragedy by Sophocles. Michele is not with us. Later we will discuss about Antigona's sentence. I'm born for love, not for hate. Yes, I agree, wrote Michele Fiorillo. Yes, it is true. Very nice sentence. Now, our next speaker is Caitlin McKinnon with a very important presentation and topic, making the familiar strange, using zines as a reflective data generation tools in research exploring arts, management, education. Very important. Please, Caitlin, you are prepared, but I will read a little bit about our presenter. Caitlin McKinnon, PhD candidate, Queen Margaret University and the University of Stirling. Caitlin holds a bachelor degree from Toronto Metropolitan University with a major in cultural studies and double minor in philosophy and curation. Fostering a strong love for learning and research, Caitlin went on to complete a PhD cert from Humber College of Arts Administration and Cultural Management before making the big move from Canada to Scotland to complete a Master of Art in Arts Festival and Cultural Management at Queen Margaret University. Throughout her education, Caitlin has love in arts and culture world, and she is a participant of variety different positions. Highlights include co-founding a community arts zine in her hometown, volunteering with the Toronto Artist Collective during the takeover of her subway kiosk and boarding at the Lakeshore Grounds Interpretive Center to run story-based workshop for the local community. Caitlin's research interests include a discourse of arts management, professionalism, cultural policy, and relations of power in the cultural sector. Hello, Caitlin, and please present to us your paper. Hello.
Hello. Well, thank you for having me here today. Just making sure my screen's shared and all good now.
Yes.
Okay, I'll get going. So I am a PhD candidate from Scotland working on a project exploring arts management education within the context of professionalization. But this presentation is focused on my use of zines as a reflective data generation tool in my research. And if you don't know what a zine is, fear not, I will explain it shortly. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to kind of bring you along my journey and experience in using zines as a qualitative data generation method in my ongoing research, where I have engaged students, academics, arts management, and cultural policy practitioners in semi-structured zine making workshops that foster conversation in which we make the familiar strange and the strange familiar. Yes. So as I said, my name is Caitlin. I am a Canadian who currently lives and works in Scotland. My interest in this topic stems from my own academic background, having participated in 2 graduate arts management programs, one in Canada and one in Scotland. And because I had that experience, I've had this really incredible opportunity to compare the different ways that different institutions, as well as different countries, teach arts management. So as a result of this, I kind of started to question, how does someone become an arts manager? What does it mean when someone says, I'm an arts manager, or I'm studying arts management? What does that look like? Is it a profession or is it a vocation? And what happens when something sits kind of in the in-between? So to give a little bit of context, historically speaking, arts managers have developed their skills on the job. And while the notion of an arts manager is definitely not new, the academic field concerned with its study is relatively speaking new. So we first see kind of the degrees developing in the 1960s, and from the onset, these formal academic training programs were not perceived as particularly valuable, with many concerned with the incompatibility of art and management and fearful of the impacts of professionalization and increased standardization in the field. So with key characteristics of an occupation's transition into a profession, including substantial education and training and the establishment of professional standards, the creation of a specialist body of knowledge, it can be argued that arts management is in a process of professionalization, where through such a process, certain voices can be perceived as more legitimate than others. In justifying my research, I would argue for the necessity of exploring arts management education at this pivotal point in its process of professionalization, following Cunliffe's concern that these normalizing and disciplinary practices are riddled with power because they privilege particular ideologies, social structures, institutional practices, and groups over other. Additionally, other authors like Heidelberg have suggested that this partial participation in professionalization has resulted in the erection and reification of many problematic barriers to entry. And this is the thing that I'm really interested in. I want to delve into this kind of center of tension, exploring ongoing issues of equity and diversity in the sector, with the aim of understanding how these different actors, students, academics, practitioners, policymakers, interpret the role of an arts manager. What are the expectations? What can we do to support them in their careers? And what fears and concerns do they have? And these are all quite complicated questions to explore. When I started my research, I was doing interviews and meeting with a lot of individuals and asking some of these questions. And I found that they were struggling to put into words their experiences or to really describe kind of beyond that surface level explanation. I also wanted to open the questions be open to questions and critiques I hadn't yet considered. And as Jan MacArthur helpfully puts it, critique that does not start with the answers to its own problems may hold a better chance of realizing useful answers. So thus, the use of zines is presented as a particularly useful data generation tool for investigating the complex dynamics that allow kind of for myself as the researcher and the participants to delve into these questions. So what is a zine? A zine is a homemade publication. There's kind of no set in stone rules for making it. It can be about anything you're interested in. It can contain poetry, narrative, drawings, comics, collage, and so much more. But at its roots, it's this idea of self-publishing, which is the key feature of what makes a zine and not a magazine. It is non-commercial and non-professional. And for me, when I was trying to figure out what kind of methods I could use to really dive into the questions I had, I thought it was just such a beautiful idea to use this creative method that is inherently non-professional to explore and problematize professionalization. As Brown et al. Aptly described, zines are often associated with radical or alternative cultures, and they become these useful tools to deconstruct an idea and encourage a personalized remixing of ideas. So for the workshops that I've done so far, and I'm partly through my research, so it's still developing, we have used what's called a mini zine. So as you can see here on the screen, it's a singular piece of paper, which has been folded to create 8 pages and then cut in a specific way so that when you maneuver it, it becomes a little booklet. And it's this multi-page technique that allows participants to explore elements of a problem or even a solution and map it across this multiple page format. So by its very nature, it asks participants to dissect and explore ideas in a way they maybe haven't done before. It's this conversation that surrounds the making that has been even more incredible as I begin to kind of do these workshops. And it has this fantastic ability to make, as I've said before, the familiar strange and the strange familiar. So zines are a space to make meaning and find relevance. How can they convey their message, my participants? Can they connect the topic or their learning experience to their own life, identity, or to its broader social, cultural, and political implications? It gives the opportunity to explore and to reflect on the implications of their learning or their practice, notice who they're learning from, question how they've practiced their work before. It asks them to define what they think is important and what they feel is worthwhile to include in that 8-page zine. It pushes for more criticality when thinking about their own experiences. What is their reaction to these ideas? What are the implications of doing it in that way? Are there any concerns that they've not yet been able to communicate before? So the sessions that I've run so far have been for about 2 hours each. In all of my sessions, I've started by discussing what I've been calling the vibes of the room. I've let participants know that this is a really relaxed atmosphere. For a lot of the people that I'm working with, they've not been involved with research before, so there's a lot of anxiety that comes along with that. So I let them know that they need to be cautious of talking over each other and respectful of each other's experiences. And I invite them to kind of use the space that we're in as they need it. So they can get up and leave and go to the washroom if they need to. They're not held down in one space. Following this, I use my own mini zine to explain my research, and the participants pass this around as I speak. The participants were also shown a number of examples utilizing the various methods, as I said, poetry, narrative, drawings, comics, all the things. And lastly, they were given a set of prompts and provocations to explore, but they were also encouraged to include experience and thoughts that were outside of my list that I had up on the screen for them. So now, having seen and held and examined some of the examples of zines, we went through the process of folding together as a group. This whole process took about 30 minutes from start to finish. With an hour and a half left, the participants were able to start their zines. So something that I was particularly aware of was not wanting my participants to feel like they had to get going right off the bat. So within that first kind of half hour, I opted to not start my recording device just yet. I wanted to let them have space to explore the materials I brought, the pens, the pencils, and the magazines, that they were told that they could rip up and they could do everything they want with them. And this time was kind of for figuring that stuff out. And I could see that it was really useful to my participants to feel the space out, to get comfortable with what they were going to do and with what they were going to work on. Something I hadn't considered when I did my first session, and I have now probably spent a little bit more time than I should have thinking about, is the reactions that my participants had to unopened supplies or undisturbed magazines. The first time I had a lot of participants who were asking, can I open this, or can I cut this up, or is this something I can use? And I noticed that as I kept going, and the materials that I had collected for this got a bit more snipped to pieces, and the pencils got a little bit more used, and the lids were taken off preemptively this time, that the participants were just much more comfortable getting started. So that was something that I was really thinking about as I keep doing these workshops in the space that I create for them. And within that, there was also an aspect of how the space was set up. So going into my first session, I realized that as I was setting up, that for some of my participants, I had just previously, the day before, been lecturing in the same room. And I realized that I was almost replicating me standing up in the front of the classroom and them sitting in their chairs and facing me. And I was replicating a very interesting power dynamic. So as I was sitting up, I made the decision that I was going to sit at the table with them instead and do my presentation on my iPad instead of up on the screen. And that created a really kind of comfortable experience for them. And I think that this comfortability was really reflected in the conversations that started to happen around the table. So as I said, I gave them that half hour to just kind of get started and think during that time. And I just kind of asked them a little bit about themselves to get them comfortable talking in general. After the half hour point, I asked the group if I was able to record. So I've done, I think, maybe 4 sessions now. So each of the groups have all been okay with recording, and we're all pretty much just wanted to keep talking about what we were talking about. So that was quite exciting. And something that I have been really trying to consider during that last bit when I'm recording is that I wasn't really asking specific questions, but rather I was asking them what they were drawn to in the prompts, asking them what they were drawn to in the supplies, what were the experience that they had and they felt compelled to explore, words that were standing out from the magazines that reflected how they were feeling. So there's a lot of just kind of exploring through the process. And at the end of the session, the participants were asked if I could take a picture or a copy of their zines before returning it back to them. And this was something that was really important to me very early on, as I felt kind of weird about asking someone to create artwork for me and then taking it away from them. So, so far, everyone has consented to me taking a copy of their zines and then getting it back. But that was always something that I was really cognizant of going into this process. And while I'm still very, very early on in this process of utilizing zines and also doing my research, I just wanted to finish off by kind of talking about the potential that they have, which is really this incredible ability to create a space for individuals to challenge conventional notions of a topic. So for myself, this has been this idea of arts management as a practice or learning of arts management. And they do this incredible thing, as Brano et al. Puts it, of positioning participants as critics, creators, and crucially, experts of their own community of knowledge. And they therefore provide a space for participants to ask those really uncomfortable questions, to challenge beliefs that they hold within themselves, within existing systems, and within the institutions which they may sit. So thank you. I hope I didn't go too quickly, but here are also some resources for using zines as a data collection method.
Thank you very much, Caitlin McKinnon, for a beautiful and lovely presentation. As we can see, at your zine is also guitar and music. Yes. Okay, now we finished all presentations, and I would love to go to the questions and discussion. Maybe I could start, for example, with Caitlin and ask her, as young generation, do you think is there a similarity between Zine and Instagram profile account?
I think to an extent, because it has this level of almost curating your thoughts.
Yes, yes.
And I think, yeah, it does have this level of it being, you get to choose where it goes out to and you get to choose who sees it. So I think there's definitely a connection to it, which I think so far I've seen when I've done with different groups, like the students versus I've worked with some individuals at some of the funding bodies in Scotland. The younger groups are obviously a little bit more receptive and ready to kind of jump into it, whereas there's a bit more coaxing, I think, from some of the older generations, although not necessarily. Sometimes they're ready to jump in as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have another question? Natasha, here you are. Natasha?
Hi, hello everyone.
Hello.
Thank you very much for all these presentations. I really enjoyed. Thank you, Professor Janicic, for moderating this session. I would like to just maybe give some comment, especially and first of all to Jasmine Lindemann, and first presentation that we heard today about the very interesting topic in this story about nationalism in Scotland and this relation between politics and cultural expression. We had a session earlier today where we were discussing, actually mentioning the historical moments and periods when politics was, when culture and especially art was used as a tool, and very efficient tool for political forces by the government, by some political power at that point, at that moment in time. So it's always problematic to talk about this topic, and it's very brave, and thank you for that. It's really important for me too, because I had that privilege to live in Scotland for a very short period of time. So I kind of read between lines this art and these messages that they were sent in the art scene in Scotland. So my question is how you can actually divide this. Do you think that it should be divided? Do you think it's a tool, or you think it's just it's actually it's extended to it's huge to that extent to it's overpowered the power, if I can say like that, if you know what I mean.
I think I do know what you mean. I think there's so much negative connotation in that sense of like using art in the propaganda ways, and it being used as a very aggressive tool as well. And I think it's mainly just in the sense of questioning it. I think that's why for me, it was a big questioning when I took on this research, and it happened kind of naturally. I remember speaking to my supervisor, and he's like, oh yeah, people who are against or for independence. I'm like, yeah, and the third group who are pro-independence, but anti-nationalism, anti-people saying, no, you can't be here. This is only what it has to be. And he's like, the third group, you have to write about that. And I'm like, okay. So I think as long as you're going into things very aware of the bigger picture, then that is helpful. But it's so easy to fall, and I definitely can see how easy it happens that suddenly you're maybe part of the problem rather than part of the solution, or how easy you can make it suddenly black and white when it's definitely shades of gray. So I can see how it happens. I can see that it's quite easy. I think it's easier to do that, right? It's easier to go Scotland good, everyone else bad, or Scottish people great, and I know a lot of my friends are English here who live here as well. Like I don't have it as much, but I know most of my English friends, when it comes to Scottish independence, there's definitely rhetoric around there. Some other people who are immigrants but don't have the privilege of being white, have then other elements of that as well that comes quite aggressively. So I think it's about consciousness of it, and I think as artists and arts management calling each other out a lot, being really present to it. But I still think there's power there that hopefully can be harnessed for good. But that's maybe just my belief in that. But it does seem like there can be, like from what I've looked at, and from my event. But I do think that there is place for that to be used for good. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question or discussion? I would love to ask Professor Olena Lilova.
I'm sorry, Radmila, Michele would like to say something.
Okay, Michele, you are first. Here you are.
Oh, I wanted just because there was this reference to Shylock and also some quote. Just like a thing I remember also because we used this suggestion in the when we perform actually Shylock in the grounds of the palace or the Natural Park in Warsaw, that some of the some lines of the Shylock, one of the main speech, when it keeps saying that he wants his money, is it's quote in don't remember now the number of the book, but in Karl Marx Das Kapital, actually. So like just, you know. And also that was also one of our choice to put to like I don't want to talk about what they've done, but just because like we are talking about using performances also to try to provoke social or cultural change, like that the performance we tried to do was like Shakespeare and Question of Power, taken from famous tragedies you see in the chat. And so there was all these like battles, as you know, in Shakespeare, no? Among kings or prince, etc. But then when we decided to put, and this was in the garden and on the premises of the Natolin Palace, the princess of the king of Poland. And then we have performed the Shylock scene in the grounds, actually in the cavern, in the grounds of the palace, to show that, I mean, maybe it's a bit simplist, but one of the roots of the power, of course, also nowadays is the money. Yeah. Also, especially of the bad power, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you for answer. And now I would love to ask Professor Olena Lilova. What is, Professor Lilova, your experience about students in Montenegro, about literature and Shakespeare literature? Do they read Shakespeare and what they think about Shakespeare literature?
Yes, of course, we have Shakespeare on our curricula, and there is a special course entitled Shakespeare Studies for our students of the master degree. So we do read plays and sonnets by Shakespeare, and we do some research through theses, seminar papers, and so on and so forth. Yes, young people's opinions are always interesting to consider and to test, right, their interpretation and understanding of their issues that have been discussed for centuries and are dealt with in various papers by so many researchers. Then what else to add? I do appreciate discussing Shakespeare with students. Of course, it is always a great advantage and privilege to read Shakespeare in the original and in translations, of course, since to understand an old text in detail and to perceive it deeply, right? We should refer to translations and to compare different translations that were done in different epochs, different decades of the 20th century, and the latest translations. So we do encourage this reading and talking about Shakespeare in our students' native languages.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lilova. Does someone have another question or discussion?
Yes, we have a question in chat in our chat here. We have a question from one follower, and the question is for Caitlin. I feel a zine is almost a bit similar to a design thinking technique. I was wondering if you noticed any improvement of collaboration or communication within the group that was tested. It's a question for Katie. Katie, please.
Yeah. So I think, as I said, I've just started doing these, so there's not enough, I think, time to see how things have changed so far. And so far, the groups that I've worked with have been pre-established groups. So I haven't been bringing in people into a group to have a conversation, although I have some of those scheduled for the new year. So I guess my answer to your question is I don't know at the moment because it's still so fresh and so new. So I apologize, it's not a very good answer.
Thank you, Kathleen, for answer. very interesting topics and very good question and answers.
Milena?
Milena, please, if you have a question.
Thank you all for these very interesting presentations. It was very, very inspiring. Well, I will have another question for Caitlin. I'm sorry if we're bombarding you with the questions, but as soon as I heard about the zines, I was amazed, and I think we can find a lot of we can apply zines in studying foreign languages. I teach Italian language, so it is a good tool for making like a project, making someone's own construction, maybe develop their own thoughts and ideas in that way. So I was wondering, would you give for your participants, would you give an overall topic, or it would be they can choose maybe whatever they want, maybe can elaborate a topic on their own? So how do you start giving ideas to the participants?
Yeah,
thank you.
So it's interesting you brought the idea that it could be used like in an educational setting in terms of like learning, because the original concept of using zines, I mean, obviously the zines there's a history of them, but the original concept that got me interested in using them for research was in COVID times, a lot of educators were using it as a way to get their students to reflect on how they were feeling doing schoolwork in COVID, or what are the implications of the work in that space. So it's interesting because yes, they have been used in that way. For my research in general, I've been giving the groups, like I said, a little bit of an introduction to my research, like 3 minutes. And then I've been giving kind of a bunch of questions that I had about what do you think an arts manager looks like? How have you thought about your learning experience? But I've made it really clear to them that they don't have to answer the questions that I had on the board. I think just in terms of using it, and because the time frame I had for some of these sessions was it felt so short, it was useful to give them some sort of prompt to start with, as opposed to being like, here's my research, respond. So I think in the context of using it for research, I think it's useful to give them a bit of a prompt, but I think in the context of using it for education purposes, or like just purely to reflect, I don't necessarily think a prompt is needed. So yeah, that's what I would say with it. It depends on the context.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that we get many answers, and we had beautiful questions. I'm sure that we will continue our communications by the email together. And so we all have emails at our papers. So I ask all of you to be in contact by emails. Michele, have a question now? Michele?
No, I was just clapping.
Yeah. Yes.
Thanks a lot. I have a lot of questions, generally speaking, like as of too much question. But now I think there is not time, not so like, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll continue communication by email altogether, and suggestion from and thanks to Professor Natasha to create this beautiful and very important conference, and ask her to organize all together once again new conference. Thank you, Natasha Kraljevic.
To Natasha and all of you.
Yeah.
Thank you all. It was very interesting session. I would like to just point out the important comment that colleagues of mine, Tamara and Olena, said in their presentation, that we will all be very soon culturally competent. So looking forward to that stage. Thank you all so much, and see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.